Yeah, so tonight we're covering how change actually happens, and we're going to be looking at the stages of change model. And I think you'll very easily be able to see how this applies to a journey such as the one that you're on. As usual, just practical sort of takeaways, no overwhelming information. Um, have either of you ever come across this model before, stages of change model, which by people that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce their name? But it is a well-known model, and as I said, I think you'll easily be able to see yourselves in it as we talk through the different stages. But I think it is really helpful to know where you are on the map, and I think with different areas of your health and fitness, you'll be in different sort of stages of change. And it can help to fill in some of the blanks as to why things that perhaps you've tried before haven't stuck, etc., etc. So the six stages are, and we'll go into these in a bit more detail, but basically you've got pre-contemplation where you haven't even thought about making a change. The second, contemplation, that's where you're sort of in that tug of war between knowing that you probably should do something, but there is a but. Then you have preparation, which is where you have sort of decided that you're going to make a change. So you're getting ready and making a plan. But until you reach stage four, that's action. So where you actually start doing something. Stage five, which is the goal really, is to get to maintenance. And that's where your sort of identity has changed and it's just who you are. And then also we will cover off stage six, which is about lapses and relapses. And this is good to know that is very normal, and it's not a failure and it is just part of the process. So when we think about pre-contemplation, and I know that you guys are already past this stage, but you can still probably resonate with it with maybe something else or where you've been previously or someone you know. So as I said, this is really where change isn't on the radar or the cons of actually making a change feel bigger than the pros. And that sort of manifests itself in saying things like, I've tried everything or nothing works for me. So you're not even considering what you might need to do to make a change. Um, and what can help at this stage is sort of information, honest reflection, but definitely not pressure because ultimately you've got to want to do this change for yourself and not because you're being pressured into it by someone else. So when we get to contemplation, this is where you sort of are now at the point where you're thinking, I know I should, but there's always a but. So really at this stage, it's like you want the result, but you don't really want to have to do too much to be able to get the result. So it's that tug of war, which is completely normal. And you can sit here for months, or even in some cases years. Where you're sort of thinking about doing the change, but not actually ever making it. So, to help at this stage can be literally as simple as getting a list of pros and cons and connecting the change to what you really care about. So, when I would have had introductory calls with either of you guys, that's one of the things that we would have talked about, would have been what your ultimate long-term goal was, why you wanted it, why is that important to you, and then talking about what are the things that need to change in order to get you to that point. I just need to let someone else in. And then the sort of to get started, you can simply, you haven't got to be perfect at everything at once and from day one. So the point here is to really shrink that first step until it stops feeling scary. So just make the first action, the first step be as small as you need it to be in order to start making that change. Then when we come to preparation, so this is at the point where you're probably gathering information, making a plan, setting a date. And for you, this joining this program will have been the preparation stage, because it will always help to have a specific plan. What do you need to do? When are you going to do it? So, and if it wasn't this program, then it might be that you need to tell somebody else. And like I said before, you need to start small enough that you can succeed and keep going. But at this stage, where you're still preparing, you do need to be careful not to do so much research that actually you still aren't taking that action step because research can be procrastination in disguise. So at some point, preparing has to become actually taking that action and doing. So when you get to stage 4, this is the point where we are actually starting to do something. So it might be that we're implementing a new routine, we're thinking about a different way of eating, perhaps, and we're putting in a lot of effort. And as it says here, it is also the most fragile stage because while we've got motivation is typically high at the start, of course, we haven't yet built a habit. So doing these things aren't automatic. So it feels like we're having to put a lot of energy in every single day in order to get to the results that we want and the place that we want to be. So, of course, what can help at this stage is having support and accountability, seeing results quickly. And as I've said a couple of times and on previous call last week, it's about understanding how you can shrink that standard on hard weeks. So, not expecting yourself to be perfect all of the time, but trying to understand what's the minimum that you know you can get done and holding yourself accountable to that. And actually, it can take up to 6 months of performing these actions before that new behaviour really starts to run on autopilot. And then the goal stage really is getting to that point where it feels like it is more of an autopilot. And nobody talks about it too much because everybody, of course, people want the results which they perceive as being either that they want to lose weight or they want to get stronger. But the bonus result of getting to this maintenance point is that it's something that you can then maintain on an ongoing basis because you now have the automatic behavior. So you need less willpower. And no longer is it something that you do or you try to do, but now actually it's you perceive yourself as someone who just does this. And that's quite a shift that is really important to me to work on with the ladies in the community because I ultimately obviously want everybody to have these tools and feel like they are someone, this is their identity that moves their body, eats good food. And of course, so that's where results live and compounding those results quietly over months and years and consistency. And that's the real win here. So what can help at this stage is to make sure that it stays interesting. Do need to be careful to watch for overconfidence. So, for example, even me, I still track my food because I know that I can't just wing it because I was saying this to somebody earlier today on a call. I very quickly forget that I've already had an iced coffee today, or I'll have now 3 Haribos out of the kids' sweets because I've forgotten the coffee that I had earlier. So when you become overconfident, actually that can it doesn't always work. So you always need to be making sure that you're looking out for that and protecting still your non-negotiable minimums and making sure that even when life gets messy, you're still doing the things that you know you need to get done. Then stage 6 being lapse and relapse, as I mentioned at the start. So it is really important to acknowledge that actually slipping back is very normal. It doesn't mean that it's a failure. It's just something that is part of the cycle. So a lapse might be a weekend where perhaps you've just not tracked anything and you've had perhaps like a couple of takeaways but then you get back on it on Monday. A relapse would be where you're actually going back a stage or two. But the thing to remember is that ultimately you need to know that you haven't blown it. You just need to get straight back into action. So whether that's the next meal or the next session, it's just making sure that it's never, I'll just start again on Monday. It's making sure it is that next meal or next session and never that it is I'll start again in September, which is very timely at the moment. And it really is sort of a spiral. So the thing to remember is that you're never going back to square one. And actually, each time you do experience something like this, you're learning a bit more. So you're starting again with more experience, more knowledge, and as it says here, the things that you're sort of learning potentially are what triggers you. So you know likely when you're going to go off track, what the early warning signs are, and maybe is there some support that you needed. And again, very few people succeed on that first attempt, and it's very normal to go round the cycle several times. So if you have what you perceive as a failed attempt, it's not proof that you can't change, it's just a lap of the spiral, and you start the next one further along. So different habits and different stages. So it might be that actually you're at different stages for different habits. So when we think about this program, for example, you might be in the maintenance stage with your training, or the maintenance stage with your steps, but you might still be in the action stage with perhaps tracking your food. That's perhaps something that hasn't become a habit yet, or understanding and making sure that you've always got the right amount of protein in your diet. And it might be that then things further removed, like alcohol or sleep, are actually you're even earlier on in that process. So again, it's just a reminder that you can't overhaul everything at once. You've got to sort of pick the ones that are most important and work on those, and then understand that it's not a sprint, if that makes sense. So, a good thing to go away and have a think about is to think about all of those habits that we talk about so much. So, training, food, and then maybe it's steps, maybe it's stress, maybe it's alcohol. But having a look at each one and thinking, where am I on these stages of change model? And what you should notice, I imagine, is that they are probably different. So you're not in the same place with everything, and that's okay. But as I said, really the journey here isn't about getting more willpower or more dedication or more discipline. It's actually what we want is it for it to become a habit so that you actually need less willpower because suddenly it's just something that you do automatically. So it is an identity shift. As I said, we want to move from I should train to I'm someone who trains. And when that happens, we're really winning. And every action that we take is a vote for creating that identity. And you've already achieved so much because you've already moved from preparation to action and are on this journey. So if you could have, as I said, it would be good to go away and just have a think about perhaps a habit that you aren't quite at maintenance with, or even perhaps that you're not at action, and then take the matching step. So perhaps if it is you know that you're just as an example, you're still not tracking your food 100% of the time. Maybe it's then, okay, so we need to write a list of what are the pros and cons, and try and work out where you are in that model and what is the action that you need to take in order to be able to move through that stage of change model. And when you move through even one stage, that is progress. So it doesn't mean that you have to leap straight in. Sorry, that whoever had joined, which I'm not sure who it is, had dropped off and has joined again. But yeah, that is in a nutshell the stages of change model.